used to work as a paramedic before burnout pushed me into driving Uber. Winter nights around Minneapolis could be miserable, but they usually paid well. One February evening, freezing rain glazed every side street, and the roads through the wealthy suburbs were nearly empty. Around 10:30, I accepted a pickup from a quiet neighborhood lined with enormous houses hidden behind bare trees. The woman waiting outside looked to be in her 50s. She wore a dark wool coat, leather gloves, and carried a small overnight bag. As soon as she settled into the back seat, she smiled politely. "You're my 4th Uber tonight," she said. The others wouldn't finish the ride. I laughed lightly and eased onto the road. "Bad weather? Maybe." She looked out the window for several seconds before adding, "Or maybe they became nervous. I assumed she'd argued with them or something equally ordinary." Nothing about her seemed threatening. She spoke softly, thanked me for turning the heat up, and even apologized for the late pickup. About 10 minutes into the drive, she asked, "Do you have children?" The question wasn't unusual. Passengers made small talk all the time. "No." "Married?" "No." "You live alone?" I glanced at her in the mirror. "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Does anyone know where you are right now?" That one stayed in the air. I mean, Uber does, but nobody waiting at home? I shrugged. "My sister checks in sometimes." She seemed relieved by that answer, though I couldn't understand why. "I'm sorry," she said. I asked because the previous drivers all received phone calls during the ride. "What kind of calls?" They answered once. "And? They didn't like what they heard?" I smiled politely. "Probably prank calls." "I don't think so." The cabin grew quiet except for the tires hissing across slush. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I ignored it. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same number. "I'd let it go to voicemail," she said without looking up. I let it ring out. Almost immediately, the Uber app chimed with a new message from my passenger's account. "Don't answer your phone." I glanced at the screen. "You can message through the app?" I asked. "I didn't. It says it came from your account." She frowned and held up her own phone. The conversation was blank. No message. I looked back at my screen. It was still there. The phone rang a third time. This time I answered. Silence, not complete silence. Someone was breathing. Slow, steady. After several seconds, the call disconnected. Neither of us spoke. A mile later, headlights appeared behind us. Then another pair, then another. 3 black SUVs. They stayed together, matching every turn. The woman leaned forward. "Don't stop." I looked in the mirror. "You know them?" "They found me." "Who?" "My family." She sounded different now. Her calm voice had cracked. "They'll tell you I'm sick." "You are?" "I don't belong with them." The SUVs closed the distance. One flashed its headlights. "They're trying to box us in," she whispered. My pulse started climbing. As a paramedic, I'd dealt with panicked people before. Her fear felt genuine. The GPS announced our destination ahead, a massive gated estate. The iron gates were already opening. "No," she said sharply, "please don't pull in." The phone rang again. Unknown number. Again. I accelerated instead of turning into the driveway. The SUVs followed instantly. One moved beside me, another stayed behind. The woman ducked below the windows. "They can't take me back." I had no idea what was happening anymore. Snow sprayed across the windshield as I turned onto a narrower road. For nearly 5 minutes, the chase continued until flashing red and blue lights appeared ahead. State troopers. I slowed immediately. Every SUV stopped too. Men in suits climbed out with their hands visible. One approached my window holding identification. "Sir, are you Edward Tyler?" "Yes." "You've done nothing wrong." He glanced toward my passenger. "We've been trying to reach your phone for 20 minutes. Another officer carefully opened her door. She didn't resist. She only looked at me. "I was hoping you'd believe me a little longer." That sentence has stayed with me ever since. At the station, detectives explained everything. The woman came from an extremely wealthy family. According to court records, she'd repeatedly disappeared before mandatory psychiatric evaluations. She would convince strangers she was escaping dangerous people, especially rideshare drivers who were isolated and unfamiliar with the situation. The black SUVs belonged to licensed private investigators hired by her family under a court order. "And the phone calls?" I asked. One detective slid several reports across the table. The first 3 Uber drivers. Every one of them had eventually realized something wasn't right. They'd contacted police after dropping her off, or after she fled from their vehicles. When they saw another driver had accepted her next ride, they repeatedly called through the temporary relay numbers Uber provides, hoping to warn whoever picked her up. But nobody spoke. They probably assumed you wouldn't believe them without identifying themselves first. That didn't explain the app message. The detective simply shook his head. We couldn't account for that. Uber found no record that the message had ever been sent. Weeks passed before I finally relaxed. Then a plain brown envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a folded thank you card. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Nothing else. Or so I thought. A photograph slipped onto my kitchen table. It showed my house. Fresh snow covered the lawn. My truck was parked in the driveway. The lights inside were on. The picture had been taken from across the street. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. You really do live alone. If you've ever assumed the driver is the biggest risk during a late-night Uber ride, I used to think the same thing. The worst part of my story is realizing I spent almost 40 minutes watching the wrong person. I was finishing a graduate research project at the university library. It was almost 1 a.m. when I finally packed up. The campus was nearly empty except for maintenance crews, distant leaf blowers, and the occasional sound of doors locking behind security staff. A cool breeze pushed dry leaves across the sidewalks, while the streetlights buzzed overhead. I requested an Uber home. The app required a PIN which I entered after matching the driver's photo, license plate, and name. Everything checked out. His name was Daniel. He looked to be in his 40s and greeted me with an easy smile. Long night? Graduate school, I answered. He laughed. That explains everything. The ride started normally. Soft jazz played through the speakers while downtown slowly disappeared behind us. I answered a couple of texts from classmates and watched storefronts drift past the window. About 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Your destination has been updated. I frowned. Instead of my apartment complex, the app now listed an address I didn't recognize near an industrial district outside town. I figured I'd somehow tap the screen while holding my phone. I switched it back and apologized to Daniel. I think I accidentally changed my drop-off. No problem, he said, glancing at the navigation. Mine still says your apartment. That caught my attention. His GPS had never changed. A few minutes passed. The roads became quieter. We drove beneath long stretches of dark trees where the headlights seemed swallowed by the night. Then my phone buzzed again. Destination updated. The industrial address had returned. This time I knew I hadn't touched anything. Daniel? He looked into the rearview mirror. Something's wrong. At the next traffic light, he pulled into an empty pharmacy parking lot. Show me. I handed him my phone. His eyebrows tightened. That's not where I'm taking you. He turned his own screen toward me. His navigation still showed my apartment. Neither phone matched. We both tried refreshing the app. Mine refused to keep the correct destination for more than a few seconds. His never changed at all. I've driven thousands of rides, he said quietly. Drivers can't edit passenger destinations like that. I tried contacting Uber support. No connection. Only one weak bar flickered on my screen before disappearing again. Daniel suggested we stay on the busiest roads until we figured it out. I agreed. The silence inside the car felt different now. Every pair of headlights behind us seemed to linger too long. Every black SUV looked almost identical. I kept checking my mirrors instead of my messages. Then another notification appeared. This one wasn't about the destination. It looked like a message from Daniel. We'll be there soon. I stared at it. Did you send this? He looked genuinely confused. My phone never left the holder. I watched him open the messaging section inside the driver app. Nothing. No outgoing message, no conversation. The notification was sitting only on my phone. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel made a decision. I'm pulling into the gas station ahead. Bright lights spilled across the parking lot as we rolled beneath the canopy. A convenience store sat open 24 hours, and by pure luck, 2 local police officers were inside buying coffee. I've never been happier to see a police cruiser. The officers listened while Daniel and I showed both phones. One officer asked if I'd changed my password recently. I don't think so. Any strange emails? That question stayed with me. An investigator later asked the same thing. A week earlier, nearly every graduate student had received what looked like an official university email asking us to verify our campus accounts after a supposed security update. I remembered completing it between classes without thinking twice. It wasn't from the university. Someone had stolen my credentials. Because my email controlled password resets, they quietly gained access to several connected accounts, including Uber. Investigators believed someone had been watching my account for weeks. They learned where I usually requested rides, what nights I stayed late, which apartment I lived in. The industrial address belonged to an abandoned warehouse district where another vehicle had reportedly been waiting around the same time my destination kept changing. The police couldn't prove exactly who was inside that vehicle. By the time officers checked the area, it was empty. I changed every password I owned, enabled two-factor authentication, replaced my email account, and stopped using ride-sharing for months. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least it looked that way. 6 months later, detectives called. They had arrested a kidnapping suspect during an unrelated investigation. His laptop contained hundreds of archived screenshots from compromised rideshare accounts. Some showed completed trips, others showed scheduled rides before the passengers even left home. One folder had my name. Inside were screenshots of my account history, my apartment, the exact route from campus, and one image that investigators still couldn't explain. It showed my ride request, complete with my driver's name, vehicle, and estimated pickup time. The timestamp was nearly 12 minutes before I had opened the Uber app that night. The detective admitted they still don't know how that screenshot existed. Neither do I. Whenever my phone vibrates during a ride now, I don't look at the driver first. I look at the screen, wondering who might already know where I'm supposed to be before I do. My name is Daniel Dan Carter. I'm 58 years old, and after retiring from the Phoenix Police Department, I started driving Uber to stay busy. I figured I'd seen enough strange people in 27 years, wearing a badge, that nothing in the back seat could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. It started with a pickup just after 10:30 on a Thursday night in downtown Phoenix. The request caught my eye because the rider had completed over 900 trips with a perfect 5-star rating. I'd never seen numbers like that. His account was older than mine, and before I even reached the pickup point, I got a notification saying he'd already added a $30 tip. When he climbed into my SUV, he looked exactly like someone you'd trust. Mid-40s, clean jeans, pressed button-up shirt, wireframe glasses. He smiled politely. "Evening, Dan. Evening. I've got one unusual request." I glanced at him in the mirror. "When we get there, please don't end the trip. I'll be 2 minutes, maybe less. Picking someone up, picking up some tools from a friend. Cell service is awful out there, and I don't want to request another ride." It sounded reasonable. The destination, though, wasn't. The app led us farther and farther from the city lights until the streets became empty stretches of desert road. Eventually, we reached an abandoned-looking storage facility surrounded by rusted fencing and dead weeds. Most of the security lights were burned out. The only thing moving was a loose chain banging against a gate every few seconds. He leaned forward before opening the door. "I appreciate this. Seriously, just keep the trip running." Then he disappeared between 2 rows of storage units. I watched the timer on the app. 2 minutes became 5. 5 became 10. The desert had a strange silence. Every now and then the wind pushed sand across the pavement, making a dry scraping sound beneath my tires. Somewhere inside the storage complex, metal clanged against metal. Then I heard voices. Not normal conversation, muffled shouting. I rolled my window down. Someone yelled something I couldn't understand. Another voice answered. Then everything went quiet again. My first instinct was to drive away. My second instinct, the one I'd spent decades developing, told me something was happening inside those buildings. I reached for my phone just as a man burst around the corner. He wasn't running toward me so much as escaping something behind him. He slammed both hands against my passenger window. "Help me!" he shouted. Please, don't leave." His eyes kept darting over his shoulder. Before I could unlock the doors, another figure stepped out from between the storage units. My passenger. He carried a dark backpack clutched tightly against his chest. The fabric looked stained in places, but in the poor lighting I couldn't tell with what. He wasn't hurt. He was breathing hard, like someone who'd sprinted a mile. He opened the rear door. "Drive," he said quietly. The man outside hit the glass again. "Don't take him." Neither of them sounded angry. They both sounded terrified. That's when every year I'd spent in law enforcement caught up with me. Instead of putting the SUV in drive, I hit the lock button. Every door clicked shut. "What are you doing?" my passenger asked. I already had 911 on speaker. His expression changed. Not panic, relief. "I was hoping you'd do that," he whispered. Within minutes, deputies and state troopers started flooding the area. The man outside dropped to his knees with his hands raised. My passenger never tried to run. He simply sat there with both hands visible, staring through the windshield. The storage units weren't abandoned at all. Hidden beneath several connected units was an illegal gambling operation. Cash games had been running there for years, away from cameras and public streets. The backpack contained stacks of bundled cash. Detectives interviewed me until sunrise. My passenger finally explained everything. Months earlier, he'd lost more money than he could ever repay. The people running the operation refused to let him walk away. They ordered him to transport cash whenever they called. He never owned a car because they could track license plates. Uber gave him anonymity. 900 rides, 5-star rating, generous tips, friendly conversations. He built the profile carefully because drivers were less likely to question him. But there was one detail investigators didn't share until several weeks later. A detective I used to work with called me. "You know why he picked you?" I figured it was luck. No, they recovered notes from his phone. He'd been researching drivers whenever he could identify them. Former military, retired firefighters, ex-police officers, people he believed would stay calm under pressure, people he thought wouldn't rob him if they realized he was carrying cash, and people who might actually help if everything fell apart. The detective told me I wasn't the first retired officer he'd ridden with. I asked how many. There was a long pause. "We're still trying to figure that out. I still drive occasionally. Every now and then I get a request from someone with hundreds of perfect ratings. Before I accept it, I always wonder whether I'm looking at another ordinary passenger or someone who spent months deciding I was the safest stranger to trust with the worst night of their life." I travel for a living, so airports blur together after a while. The only reason I remember landing outside Chicago that Tuesday is because the next morning I woke up with a receipt for a trip I never took. My flight landed a little after 12:30 a.m. The airport was quiet except for rolling suitcases, distant announcements, and the steady rush of traffic outside the terminal. I requested an Uber, walked to the pickup area, and matched the PIN with the driver before getting in. He barely spoke beyond confirming my hotel. The ride lasted maybe 25 minutes. I answered a few work emails, watched rain streak across the window, thanked him when we arrived, and went straight to bed. Everything about that ride was forgettable. At 7:15 the next morning, my phone buzzed with an email receipt. The pickup location was correct. The airport. The drop-off wasn't. According to Uber, I'd traveled almost 40 miles northwest to a suburb I'd never even heard of. The fare was nearly double what I should have paid. I opened the app, expecting to find both rides listed. Instead, the hotel trip was gone. There was only the suburban ride. I checked my hotel room key history. My first key swipe was at 1:18 a.m. The receipt claimed I was still riding across the suburbs at 1:26. That wasn't possible. Customer support assumed I'd accidentally requested 2 rides. I only ordered one, I told the representative. Sometimes duplicate requests happen during busy airport pickups, but I was asleep in my hotel when your app says I was driving somewhere else. There was a long pause before she promised to escalate the issue. At first, I figured it was just a billing mistake. Then I checked everything else. My company chat showed I'd replied to my manager from the hotel Wi-Fi at 1:22. The hotel security manager reviewed the hallway camera after I explained the situation. There, I was walking toward my room, carrying my suitcase while, according to Uber, I was supposedly halfway across the county. Even my credit card agreed. The hotel snack purchase I'd made minutes after checking in appeared between the airport parking charge and breakfast. Every timeline pointed to the same conclusion. I couldn't have taken that ride. 2 days later, I got a call from Uber's investigations team. The woman sounded more nervous than I expected. "We believe your account became linked to another passenger through a rare verification error." I asked what that meant. There were 2 passengers with nearly identical names requesting rides from adjacent pickup zones within seconds of each other. Something during the PIN verification merged portions of your ride histories. "So somebody else has my trip?" "Briefly, yes. And you received theirs." She apologized several times and said engineers were correcting the records. I asked if they had contacted the other passenger. Silence. Then she said, "Law enforcement is handling that." The detective called me the following afternoon. He asked me to describe exactly what I'd been wearing after leaving the airport. Navy blazer, gray carry-on, blue shirt. Another pause. Height, 6 feet, about 190. He thanked me but didn't explain why. Before hanging up, I asked what was going on. His answer stayed with me. "The passenger connected to your account never made it home." A few days later, he agreed to tell me a little more. The suburban address wasn't the man's home. It was a quiet residential street with only a handful of houses. Doorbell cameras showed his Uber dropping him off shortly after 1 in the morning. Then, another SUV pulled alongside. The missing passenger picked up his suitcase, spoke briefly to someone inside, climbed into the waiting vehicle, and disappeared. Nobody has reported seeing him again. The detective believed he knew whoever was waiting. There were no signs of a struggle, no abandoned luggage, nothing. Without the account mix-up, and investigators would have had no reason to examine that address so closely. The ride would have looked completely ordinary. Weeks passed before the detective called one last time. "We've compared airport surveillance." He sounded exhausted. "I thought you should know something. The missing passenger and I were almost the same age, within an inch of each other in height, similar build, same dark rolling suitcase. Even our jackets were nearly identical under the airport lights. When he emailed me the still images, I honestly couldn't tell which one was me until I noticed the color of my tie. I asked the question that had been bothering me since this started. Do you think whoever picked him up was expecting someone else?" The detective didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "We can't rule anything out." Uber corrected my account the next week. My original hotel ride reappeared as if nothing had happened. The other trip vanished completely. Every now and then I fly through that airport again. I still verify the license plate, the PIN, and the driver's face before I open the door. But I always find myself scanning the line of waiting vehicles beyond the rideshare lane, wondering whether one of them is parked there for a passenger who simply looks close enough.